give you 40 days to get back home. I done called up a gypsy woman on the telephone. I'm gonna throw a cross charge against you. That'll be the very thing that'll send you. I'm gonna see if you'll be back home in 40 days. 40 days. Oh, 40 days. I'm gonna see if you'll be back home in 40 days.
Glen,
Far away.
Glen Silverthorn. I've known you for quite a while. You're one of those guys that I always think of as has sort of played music in Norfolk County forever.
Well, yeah,
Not quite.
I would say it goes back to about 1957. I played with, I filled in with Leo Loeffler, who was a violin and trumpet player, and he played with Mrs. McDonald as orchestra. And they had a little band, and I used to have to fill in with them. But I also filled in for Don Walker from Waterford, when Ace had a band. But Don also played for Leo Loeffler and this Mrs. McDonald, and that's the band basically I started with as a kid. And that didn't last for an awfully long time. It lasted up till about 1959. And that's when Rick Danko first phoned me up.
Right. So what did he ask you when he called you up?
When he phoned me, we lived on our farm at that time outside of Simcoe. And he phoned one evening and he says, Brock Cross at the Tartan restaurant told me that you drummed, because I knew his son from high school days. And of course, Rick was working at the old meat market, Simcoe Meat Market. And he'd go around to Kent Street there where the Tartan restaurant was. And he'd go in and have a coffee, and I guess Brock or Bob Cross talked to him, they ran the restaurant, about me being a pretty good drummer, and I think that was the connection with Rick first phoning me.
Oh.
And he asked me, he said, I need a drummer. I'm using Herb Titmus, my public school teacher that I have out on the, near the 7th concession where they lived out that way, and he went to public school out there, and he was only at that time 16 years old, and he said, my public school teacher doesn't use cymbals. Do you use cymbals with your drum kit? I said, yeah, I do. He says, well, look, I'm tired of having him. Although he played in this band, he was a kid in school playing with his teacher at that time, and that's where the Starlights band was formed.
And how old were you at the time?
And when he phoned me at that time, I would have been about 22. Because 1959.
So you were a little older than he was.
Oh yeah, I was about five years older. Like he was 16 and I was.
So the Starlight, what was it called?
Starlights.
The Starlights.
Yeah.
So what kind of music did the Starlights play?
We played. Now, believe it or not, we played a bit of rock and roll because he was into doing Jerry Lee Lewis things that was coming out. Little Richard, Chuck Berry, people like this. He was doing that kind of music. But we had a piano player named Don Strugnell who was in his 40s, and he knew all the old standards. So Rick was getting jobs at the Delhi Legion, down here at Dover at the Yacht Club. We played here. We played once I joined his band. We played at the Silver Hill Dance Hall, the Highlands at the out at Long Point at the Causeway there when the Highlands had a dance hall. I think Wiggins Hall, possibly, I'm sure, yeah, we did a couple of gigs at the Hillcrest Dance Hall at the time. It was that then. And I said Wiggins, I think I mentioned that. Silver Hill, I mentioned that. Yeah, so, that was most of them, but the thing was, it was about early 1960 when he says, you gotta come down with me. He brought me to Dover to see Ronnie Hawkins. And that's where he first set up the jobs that we played with Ronnie Hawkins as a front band, along with a number of other front bands that would come in, like Sonny Sinclair, Sonny and the Saturns came in from Brantford. And it's where Ronnie got to know Richard Manuel that joined the band they were called the Rockin' Rebels, Richard Manuel and the Rockin' Rebels from Stratford. And they would come down and front the band. And I think there were a couple of other groups that came in too, but I played with Rick in all those places. I would say over the 2 years or so, from late '59, because he got a hold of me before I moved away from the farm. then my parents bought a house over on the highway, on number 3 highway west of Simcoe. And but he'd pick me up in his little MG, and we'd drive all over getting jobs. He was like a kid brother to me, because I never had any brothers or sisters. I loved that kid. I loved him. When Ronnie finally hired him, this was a memorable Sunday night. I can remember it was May '61 when he finally hired him. That May, he needed a bass player, and that was Sunday night we were playing. I should back up a little bit. One of the things that Rick said, he says, Ronnie Hawkins' band is playing at the Simcoe Arena along with Conway Twitty, Harold Jenkins, and another band from London. There were 3 bands playing, and he says, I think that might have been the first time I had seen Ronnie, was when Rick dragged me down there, because he had been to see him before, and he dragged me down there to see Ronnie Hawkins. He says, I want to front that band. I think we can do it. And that's when we started coming down and watching Ronnie. And then he got it set up to front, I guess, with Don Ivy. Don Ivy set that up, you see, so that we could front. And that must have happened 6 or 8, maybe 8 times, 8, 10 times that we fronted the band. We also fronted Jerry Lee Lewis. Yeah. Jerry Lee Lewis came in and did a gig. That was during that time. This one Sunday night, Ronnie and Levon Helm and Robbie Robertson and was the bass player himself that was playing with him then, came out and watched us play. And I thought, when does Ronnie Hawkins come out and stand with a crowd, 500-600 people standing there in the gardens and watch us? And there's something going on. I thought, something's happening tonight. By the end of the night, well, at the break, one of the breaks, they called Rick back, and he came out and he said to his brother Junior Danko played in our band, and Don Strugnell. We had a guy named Jim Leach, who is still, he's one of the few that are alive yet living in Simcoe. He was our bass player, and I was the drummer. We had a 5-piece group.
And Rick played guitar.
And Rick played guitar, and his brother played. But his brother played rhythm, and he played lead, plus he sang. His brother sang, and I sang. And we do things like Ruby Baby and all those old rock and rollers, and we provide harmony. He got me singing harmony. That's where I think I first started doing that. It was before I ever joined Don Leatherdale's band. They were watching us like a hawk that night. When Rick came out from the back room behind the stage there, he said, they've invited me to go back to Grand Bend with them tonight, because they were playing at the Imperial Hotel in Grand Bend all week long, or they would be in Toronto. They would be playing in Toronto, and this Rebel Payne, who was their bass player at that time, his wife was getting a little antsy about him not being in Buffalo, because he was a sexy looking bugger, and he was making all the women. You wouldn't believe the guy. But anyway, he ended up going back to Buffalo, so Ronnie needed a bass player. Well, Rick had always played guitar, but when that started up, he ended up joining them. We all followed Ronnie's Cadillac out to Blaney, west of Green's Corners, to where Rick lived with his 3 brothers and mom and dad. And Tom Danko said, yeah, to let the kid go. But Leola, the mother, she said, geez, he's just a kid, yet. He's only 16. He wasn't even turned 17, I don't think, yet. He says, should he be running off up there with those guys? What's he going to get himself in for? And he asked me, he says, what do you think I should do? I says, well, you never know where it could go. Might be a big career for you. Well, we'll see what happened. But so anyway, they went up to the place, and they left their home and went on their way, and I went back to our house on the highway there. And it wasn't long before I was going up to Grand Bend to watch them rehearse, and they'd rehearse. Ronnie'd have them rehearsing all night. And Levon, oddly enough, was teaching Rick all the bass, riffs and everything, and all the breaks, and he learned all the tunes very, very quickly. Right. The next week he was playing with them in Port Dover with his Lou Miles suit and skinny tie, and we'd go. I went to see him quite often after that, and that was the birth of the band, because later in the summer, Ronnie hired Garth Hudson. And of course his excuse to his mother was, well, he's asked me to teach the guys music and how to read. That was his big deal, right? If you read Ronnie's books, you know that.
Yeah, he wasn't just being a rock and roller.
No,
he was being a teacher.
He was a jazz pianist too, piano and organ. And of course, then he hired, of course, Richard Manuel, who was good on drums and piano. He'd fill in on drums if Levon would come out and play like mandolin or something like this, or a different kind of number. But that's the way it worked out, and that band was built in the year '61. What I noticed every time, at least when we get there, we'd have to go to set up early, but there seemed to be a big hubbub of people in the hallway that used to be in the gardens that led into the main room. And you'd always see Don flitting about, Don Ivy, in and out of his office and floating around and looking busy. And you'd see Nectal, Fred, I think it was over at the food bar there, selling pop, stuff like that. It was, people were setting things up. There always seemed to be a busyness to the building when you'd walk in. It was kind of an exciting atmosphere, I would say, pervading the place. It was always, I'd be excited just driving to get there, knowing what was going to happen, or in anticipation of what was going to happen.
And so they'd have an opening act or two?
Yeah. Well, really, we were it, because we were the front band, and we would start the night off at let's say, I don't know, 9 o'clock or 8:30, and then at 9:30 or 10, Ronnie come on and do his thing, and then we'd come back on for another 3/4 of an hour, and he'd end the night.
And how long would it go on in those days?
And I think it was going about 9 to 1, 1:30.